Good evening. Dasan. Good evening. I'm Stephen Pugnani. I'm head of marketing here at the Institute. On behalf of the Nature Conservancy and Cranbrook Institute of Science and the Freshwater Forum, I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight. This is our third lecture. Our registration, as you can see, continues to be very strong, so thank you. Let your friends know about the series. There are 3 more left, one in February, March, and April. Summaries on the website, each one equally as interesting, I assure you. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Northern Trust, tonight, and Fred Adams, chairman. Fred is also on the Board of Governors here, and we appreciate your support and attendance, Fred, so thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge our media partner, Michigan Public Radio. Following the lecture tonight, I'll have a microphone. If you could raise your hand, I'll bring the microphone to you. That will enable that everyone can hear your question to make better sense of the answer. And we're also recording these lectures, and they're available on our website in about a week at the most. So that's a great way to tell other people about the series. If you forward a link with some of the lectures that we've already posted, it's a great way to spread the word. Tonight's lecture will be telling us about the bays of Michigan, something that interests all of us. Scott Sowa currently serves as the Director of Science for the Nature Conservancy in Michigan and as a Senior Aquatic Ecologist for the Nature Conservancy's Great Lakes Project. He's also a consultant to the Freshwater Forum here at Cranbrook, and we appreciate your input for that, Scott. In his position, Scott provides scientific leadership and advice to the Nature Conservancy and its partners to help establish and implement holistic conservation strategies to protect and restore the Great Lakes ecosystems for the benefit of people and nature. He and his team of scientists also provide technical and scientific support to a wide array of conservation efforts through collaborative research that fulfills critical data, knowledge and information gaps, and leads to the development of new restoration techniques and information technologies. He obtained his BS in Fisheries and Wildlife from Michigan State University and an MS and PhD in Fisheries and Wildlife from University of Missouri. Scott is a native of Muskegon, and I was told just a few minutes ago he's also an aspiring jazz harmonica musician. So I have a feeling that's what he will open with. So Scott, welcome.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction, and now I know who, at least I've narrowed it down to 5 people I need to keep my mouth shut around as I travel. So, well, I want to also thank Cranbrook Institute for partnering with us on this lecture series and hosting it, but also want to thank all of you for taking time to come out and hear me speak this evening. But I hate to throw a curveball, but given the deep freeze that we're going under right now, it just got me to thinking. I decided to the last moment to change my talk to complement the first talk in this series, okay? Dr. Patrick Doran, our Director of Conservation, kicked this off on October 25th with a talk entitled, "Can You Take the Heat?" talking about climate change, its impacts to the Great Lakes, and how we at the Conservancy and our partners are working to develop climate adaptation strategies to ensure that all of our conservation strategies across the Great Lakes are climate smart. And all I've heard is that this thing's got rave reviews. So I thought, what the heck, why don't I join the club? So I said, why don't I give a talk, Can You Take the Cold? How to live comfortably even while you're freezing your buns off. So this just happened, the cold snap just started this past weekend, so I started doing my research, and then on Sunday, I come across this interesting article online, actual story, so online newspaper. I find out this is entitled, "Hardy Children of Siberia Fight or Boost Their Immunity Through Pouring Water Over Themselves in Negative 25 degrees Celsius Weather." So I continue reading and find out that this is a daily ritual of all kindergartners in Barnaul, Siberia. And they interviewed the people, and they said, we do it every day. They frolic in the snow and pour water over themselves, and it makes them hardy. And I would say, looking at some of the boys, they're pretty hardy individuals. So, but I figured, a good scientist that I am, it must be true if it's in an online newspaper. So I tried it on my kids on Monday, much to their dismay, and unfortunately they said that this would ward off the flu, but now my kids are in bed with the flu. So I think my faulty assumption was I didn't start when they were in kindergarten. But anyway, but fortunately I looked at my phone, my weather app on my phone this morning, and found out it's going to be 50 degrees on Tuesday, so I said, what the heck? And luckily for you, I switched my talk back to the original at the last moment. So, but I am, in all seriousness, I'm going to talk to you about a very, very important habitat or ecosystem of the Great Lakes, and that's bays. And they're not only important in an ecological sense, okay? They're important, they played such a huge role, most of the bays, in terms of the cultural, or they're called centers of commerce or cultural evolution of the Great Lakes, and also their importance. Many people refer to them as the economic, social, and ecological engines of the Great Lakes. And so I hope I will share with you a wonderful journey, and it will be education and informative to you. But by the end of my talk, I hope that you'll find, as I do, that indeed the Great Lakes bays are engines and treasures of the Great Lakes. And they have something that they all share. All of them have a boom and bust history, okay? Not just ecologically, but also in a socioeconomic sense in terms of the communities that line their shores. And what we have to do is, from a conservation standpoint, is we have to work to dampen those cycles, okay, through sustainable conservation actions. But that's not easy, okay? They present us with the most diverse socioeconomic settings in the Great Lakes, by far. And that presents really complex problems for conservationists like us. And in fact, you'll see the Great Lakes Project of the Nature Conservancy is one of the most comprehensive efforts to try to holistically conserve the Great Lakes at such a grand scale. And the bays are where all facets of that strategy, the Great Lakes Project strategies, come together in one place. So, but before I get into a talk of bays, I want to make sure some of you are probably not familiar with the Nature Conservancy, the wonderful organization that I work for. So I want to make sure that everyone has an understanding of our roots, what we do, where we work, how we work. But Nature Conservancy was actually founded by a handful of scientists or ecologists way back in 1915. But we actually weren't incorporated as a non-for-profit organization until 1951. We now are the largest conservation organization in the world. We have over 1 million members worldwide. We have operating units or offices in all 50 states and over 30 countries. We also have 550 scientists. So we like to say that our work is grounded in science, whereas I like to think of our work as being guided by science, but grounded in reality. Because when it comes down to it, conservation involves countless decisions, okay? And those should definitely be informed by science in order to fulfill our mission and vision. However, they have to be enveloped at the same time within the socioeconomic context or realities in the places where we work. And that's what I love about the Nature Conservancy, okay? That's what we do. So, on with the talk. Starting with a few fun facts. Would anyone care to say what the definition of a bay is? Be ready to be blown away. Nobody? This is scouring the scientific literature, so. It's a body of water forming an indentation of the shoreline, larger than a cove or smaller than a gulf. Unfortunately, with this definition, you have to know what a cove and a gulf is, but oh well. They're also known as harbors or freshwater estuaries. I like to call them a cutesy term of freshtuaries, but my colleagues think that's a bit wonky, so I kind of stick away from that. They're often shallow throughout, gradual deepening, and most of them are fed by one or more major rivers, which gives them a significant connection to land. The prototypical freshwater bay in the Great Lakes is Saginaw Bay, which I have circled over here in Lake Huron. Gradual, shallow throughout, gradual deepening, fed, as I'll show you a little bit later, by a very large river, has a large connection to the land. And that's an actual picture of a kayaker out on Saginaw Bay. Very beautiful sunset, or sunrise, I should say. So Bay facts continued. How many bays are there in the Great Lakes? Come on, someone has studied this, right? No one? 10? It's unknown. That's a trick question, sorry. But serious, there's never been a comprehensive inventory of bays. And given the definition, it would be actually hard to get an exact count. But what we do know is that there are bays on every Great Lake. And there's actually lots of them, from the large ones on Lake Superior, Thunder Bay, and Duluth Harbor in the west, to Green Bay in Lake Michigan, as well as the smaller Grand Traverse Bay, Georgian Bay and Saginaw Bay in Lake Huron, Maumee Bay and or Western Lake Erie. Really all of Western Lake Erie operates or functions like a bay. And then, again, also known as harbors. They're not called bays in Lake Ontario. I don't know why, but they are all called harbors. And so you have Sackett's and Henderson harbors on the east side of Lake Ontario. Oh, thank you. So what I have highlighted up here, just some of we work in a lot of bays. Like we're doing work over in Grand Traverse Bay on reef restoration. We're doing work with cattail restoration through water manipulation to improve native fisheries habitat over in Henderson Sackett's Harbor. But I'm going to focus on these large three main bays for much of my talk. Green Bay, Saginaw Bay, and Western Lake Erie. So, as I reference in my slide, these bays are something special, engines of the Great Lakes. They're centers of commerce, cultures, and conservation. Well, what makes bays so special? Well, I want to take the next few minutes to walk you through 5 key elements of bays that truly do make them special in an ecological sense, but it's also these 5 features that don't necessarily operate in isolation of one another, but it's the combination of these 5 factors when they come together that make them these treasures of the Great Lakes, which was recognized by Native Americans and early European settlers, and thus they became these centers of commerce and cultural diversification throughout the whole Great Lakes. So let's get started. Stability. This is both a blessing and a curse, and I'll tell you what the curse is in a little bit. But bays, how many people realize that the Great Lakes have actually quite strong currents going through much of them? Good, several people do. You must live in those areas of St. Clair or up at the Straits of Mackinac. But in reality, there's strong currents throughout most of the Great Lakes, but there aren't strong currents in the bays. Okay? What you have, you can see the absence of currents in most of the bays. And what that means is when you have less currents, you have more stable bottom. That's a good thing for insects or aquatic macroinvertebrates, which is a base of the food chain, much of the food chain in the Great Lakes. So more stable bottom, good. You also have less fetch. Anyone know what fetch is? I hear it. I see a hand way back there. Do you want to speak up or no?
Distance of the wind running in a direction.
Correct. Correct. The longer the distance, the more energy that the wind can create. Okay? So bays, since they're protected, most of the time that the wind blows, most wind directions, it's protected. And so the wind cannot build up energy, and so what you get is protection from the winds, less wave disturbance, and so you get more stable habitat. That's why you find this abundance of coastal wetland habitat and a diversity of coastal wetland habitat in bays. Okay? But again, now let's get to the curse. So bays, this isn't actually a bay. This is where I grew up, Muskegon, Michigan. This is Pere Marquette Park. This is the mouth outlet of Muskegon Lake as it comes into the south and the north, between the north and south piers. And what's interesting is this functions like a bay. And bays, what do? They act like black holes. Anything that comes in their grass, they don't let go. So they're accumulators of sediment or anything we put in the water. And you can see this here. See how dark that water is? It's trapping all of those fine sediments and organic matter. Whereas over here, you have these nice clear waters on the south side and north side of the pier heads. So remember that. It's going to come back later in my talk. Another key feature of bays, habitat availability. I just mentioned the importance of coastal wetland habitat. There is no more important habitat in all the Great Lakes. When you start drawing lines to the number of organisms and plant species that are found there, this is the most important habitat. more species use coastal wetland habitat than any other in the Great Lakes. More plants can be found than any other in coastal wetland habitat. And when it comes to bays, you find that type of habitat in the greatest amount or extent than any other. It's very predictable habitat because of that stability again. Okay, so that's good from if you're going to the grocery store, you want to know it's open, right? You don't want to go there and, oh my God, it's closed. Same with wildlife. They want to know that that food source or that nesting source is going to be there. And as I said, you got this great diversity of plant and animal life. And then another thing is that what we don't often hear about, but the historical records bear true, is that we have over 30 fish species that are dependent on coastal wetland habitat for spawning, for successful reproduction. We've lost most of that. We still have an abundance of coastal wetland habitat in places, but most of them are inaccessible to fish. And it was in the bays, from the historical accounts, particularly at the outlets of the large rivers that fed into them, where we had coastal wetland habitat that was highly connected to the Great Lakes waters of the bay. Here's an example, two tangible examples of the abundance of coastal wetland habitat. Green Bay represents, in terms of shoreline, less than 5% of the total miles of shoreline in Lake Michigan. Yet 25% of all the coastal wetlands in Lake Michigan are found in Green Bay. Very important place. And waterfowl know this. Other organisms know this. Saginaw Bay contains the largest continuous stretch of wetland habitat in Lake Huron, remaining today. And historical data bear out the fact that even prior to European settlement, it was the same fact. And what you see here, green, is continuous stretches of coastal wetland habitat in Saginaw Bay. Okay? I want to walk through this slowly, because this is really where the rubber starts to meet the roads in terms of why bays are so important ecologically, but also in terms of how they have driven and influenced the socio-cultural development of the Great Lakes region. Okay, so as I said earlier, they're all fed by large rivers. Here's the drainage area of Saginaw Bay. Large connection of land. So it's all about energy, energy, energy. Energy comes in lots of different forms, okay? That's what makes systems go. It's the base of the food pyramid, okay? So what do you get when you have this big connection to land? Huge inputs of nutrients and organic matter. One base of a food web, right? You can actually see the plume of sediment and organic matter coming out of Saginaw River right there from satellites. It's fascinating. They're also shallow. What does that mean? Okay? Well, you get lots of vertical mixing. Even though these things are accumulators, just imagine if we don't have many currents there, right? So if we didn't have this vertical mixing because they were shallow, where wave action can actually reach down and scour up the sediments, those organic materials would become unavailable to the organisms. So a million years, they become oil. A billion years, they become oil, I should say. Another important thing is another form of energy, UV radiation, that grows plants. Most of the bays are in the photic zone. This is a layer, so you get aphotic zone. What happens in the aphotic zone? No plant growth, right? Photic zone, you get all that plant growth. What does that mean? Lots of foods for lots of organisms. Also, lots of habitat for lots of organisms. Finally, you have this synchronization. So because they're shallow, what you see here is the summer warming, the rate of summer warming, okay, or spring warming, I'm sorry. And the darker the color, the quicker the rate of warming has been. But what's interesting is the bays, because they're shallow, they warm faster and they cool quicker. But what you get is a synergy of mixing and warming in the spring. And so this timing is critical to a lot of organisms. Their life cycles are actually tied to this synergy. And hopefully we don't lose it in light of something like climate change. So what does all of this lead to? All that energy availability. The most productive, this is why they're called the engines of the Great Lakes. Bar none, the most productive habitats in all the Great Lakes are the bays. Okay? They're the engines of the Great Lakes. Anyone know what this is? Fish fly. I heard that for the first time yesterday when I gave this talk. I've never heard it called a fish fly in all my years. Yeah, it's the Michigan mayfly to me. But it's the largest mayfly in the world. It's called, the scientific name is Hexagenia lambata. And here's a hatch, cars driving through a hatch. What do you think this is? That's a Doppler image of a mayfly hatch. That was taken on June 25th, 2005. So This is, I mean, you couldn't even count these. I mean, a trillion would be a lowball number of how many mayflies are hatching out there. And these happen in all the bays. Unfortunately, we lost these for a period, and it's still very, in Saginaw Bay, and we don't know exactly the reasons behind it. There's speculation as to the various reasons in terms of excess sediment or contaminants, et cetera, but they are starting to rebound, so that's a good thing. But we still have these amazing hatches in western Lake Erie and Green Bay and elsewhere. So what does this mean? Base of the food. This trickles through the whole food chain. That's why we have the most famous walleye fishery in all the world in western Lake Erie. Early life history stages of the fish feed on these, larval stages of them, as well as the adult. Also, waterfowl feed on these in abundance. So productivity. What does all this lead to? All the other preceding four elements. This is what we're in the business of doing, conserving biodiversity, diversity. It's the most diverse habitats in the Great Lakes, okay? A prime example is western Lake Erie. It is the most place, if you want to go to the most biodiverse place in all of the Great Lakes, you go to western Lake Erie. It's got over 300 plant species, hundreds of bird species come through there, migrate through there each year, 55 species of reptiles and amphibians, and over 50 species of fish. You've got emery sedge here, you've got prairie fringed orchid, some of the rarest plants in the Great Lakes. You've got also the American white pelican that migrates through there, and perch, yellow perch or walleye. So what did all this mean? If you break it down into basic terms, you have these abundant resources, but you also have amazing transportation capabilities. The early explorers, Marquette, Champlain, Jean Nicolet, they all, you read their journals and they all say the same thing when they come to the bays. Abundant resources beyond measure, transportation routes inland and up the coasts, basically writing, please come develop these areas. And it's no surprise, you know, that Native American, even prior to European settlements, the Native American settlements flourished here, okay? Jean Nicolet described the Menominee Indians who occur up on the northern side and western side of Green Bay. At the time Jean Nicolet came through, he described the immense number of settlements that occurred at the mouths of all the rivers that fed into Green Bay of the Menominee Indians. Okay. You also have the Ho-Chunk Indians, also more commonly known as the Winnebago, that occurred on the, or settled the Door Peninsula side of Green Bay. And Ho-Chunk in the native tongue means harvest the rice. That was the staple of all these communities. And if I actually go back, this is an early rendition. This is rice, wild rice. And the descriptions of the early settlers of the abundance of wild rice in all these bays is staggering. Whoops. Saginaw Bay, you had the Potawatomi on the northern side, and then the Sauk, or the people of the outlet of the Saginaw River. And then over in the Maumee Bay, you had the Kickapoo on the northern side and the Erie tribes on the southern side. But what amazed me is I like reading historical accounts. It gives me perspective of some historic baselines. No delusions that we'll ever get back there, but it's fun to know where we came from. But what's interesting is exactly almost 200 years later, the early settlers or explorers came through in the mid to late 1600s, okay? Then you had all of these other accounts. I don't know, there was this gap, and it seems almost anywhere you go in the United States, there seemed to be this 200-year gap. But then you have all these descriptions, like Truman Fox wrote all kinds of, history of Bay City, history of Saginaw County, history of Saginaw Valley. And when they describe it, it's like the early explorers. So nothing had changed. There had been sustainable use of these places for 200 years, okay? So I want to actually read for you an excerpt of Truman B. Fox's History of the Saginaw Valley. So he says, wild or native fruits such as plums, cherries, grapes, etc., grow in great abundance upon the bottomlands and along the margins of all the streams. While all manners of shrub fruits and berries are found in greatest profusion in the woods, including currants, gooseberries, and several varieties of whortleberries, which I had no idea what a whortleberry is, blackberries, red and black raspberries, strawberries, and cranberries. He goes on to say, the outlets of the rivers were all bordered with plentiful growth of wild rice and were constantly the resort of all kinds of aquatic fowls, especially ducks, which during the fall of the year, when the rice was ripe, came hither in clouds. The Saginaw Valley furnishes an excellent and valuable variety of timber, including oak, beech, maple, hickory, black walnut, butternut, cherry, basswood, ash, elm, pine, and hemlock. The oak found here are excelled by none in the Union and is found in such large quantities throughout this valley. There is plenty of wild game to be had also, if there were time to take it, for the woods is full of squirrels, rabbits, coons, deer, black bears, whose flesh is not all that palatable. The streams, too, are full of fish, but the men are too busy at their craft to care. And I'll tell you what too busy craft that was in a moment. Okay? So, another thing that's interesting is after that, Truman B. Fox goes on to describe the fact that as the land was cleared and put to plow, he described that what was found there was soil of no greater fertility than in all the land. Okay? And so what came in, first and foremost, after we started settling these lands was agriculture. You see here, all the brown area, that's row crop agriculture. Okay? And he's right. These are called lake plain prairies, which I'll talk about in a second. But Truman Fox was right. Here's a map showing soybean production. What we generally grow in these lake plain prairies are corn, soybeans, potatoes, and beets. We're the sugar capital of the world, if you didn't know that. It's not sugar cane, it's sugar beets. But the dark green areas show the maximum production of soybeans, and you could go on corn and whatnot. So what caused this? Like so many habitats in the Great Lakes, glaciation had a hand in why these soils are so productive. So as the glaciers retreated 14,000 years ago for the last time, what happened? The actual extent of the water went way up on land, okay? So you can see western Lake Erie. And what happened? Earlier I mentioned that these are accumulators, right? All that organic material, all that rich stuff coming from the land, sitting there just depositing on this surface. But once they retreated and the waters went down, what you were left with is these fertile lands. In fact, one of these, another accumulator, the largest swamp east of the Mississippi was found in the Great Lakes. How many people knew that about the Great Black Swamp? Few people. Largest drainage operation in all of history. But the Great Black Swamp, as an example, was formed by glaciation and created some of the most productive farmland in all the world. Now it grows soybean and corn in abundance. So the other thing that all of this productive, diverse setting, you had everything you wanted right there. And it didn't take long. Here's Fort Howard in Green Bay, one of the earliest settlements in the Great Lakes, right on the tributary of the Fox. What we saw is rapid development and change. Here's Bay City, early art rendition of it. What do you see? All of these ships going up and down the Saginaw River. Schooners on Green Bay in the lower left-hand panel. And then it became, as the Industrial Revolution came along, we realized that, well, rivers are great for transportation and up the coast, but what we really can do is if we link rail and shipping at these critical junctures, which we did in almost all the bays, what can we do? We can maximize our industrial production to supply the nation, if not the world. And so what you had is all of the bays, these 3 bays, became some of the world's leading producers of various goods and products. Green Bay, known for beer. This is the Rar Beer Company. 1900, there's 5 major beer companies. Blesch, Hagermeister, not Jägermeister, Hagermeister. And also iron, the Green Bay Furnace Company. There were 5 furnace smelters at the mouth of the Fox River, which is at the very tip of Green Bay, at 1900, okay? Supplying the nation and the world, okay? Automobiles, GM, Look at how many plants they have throughout the Saginaw Bay watershed. Also ships, Defoe Ship Company existed and built warships. Most people don't know that. The Defoe Ship Company was a warship building company in Saginaw Bay that existed for years. And then Dow Chemical Company and glass and furniture. Most people don't realize that Toledo was the world leading producer of glass, and still is in many ways. Owens Corning is there, its headquarters. This is Libby Glass Company. And at one time, Toledo was a leading manufacturer of bicycles. Okay? But this is the interesting story of sustainability, at least in a business sense, is that every single one of those bicycle manufacturers, and I think there was almost 10 of them, and major ones that supplied the world, including the American Bicycle Company, ABC Bicycle Company. All of them, as soon as the automobile came around, what did they do? They switched to automobile production. ABC, this was their first automobile called the Toledo Gasoline Touring Car. But they all went out of business. Ford, GM, Chrysler survived. So, another thing that all of the bays have in common is a shared legacy of booms and busts. Okay? Unfortunately, there was this common misperception, at the turn of the 19th century, that the resources that were there were inexhaustible. And I want to read you an excerpt from Reverend Charles Brigham, from Ann Arbor, he's called the White Pine Prophet. He had only moved to Michigan and been there for 2 years. And this is what he said. It is common to speak of the pine lands of Michigan as inexhaustible. We hear that the supply may be expected to exist for ages to come from this prolific source. Men here think lumber forests of Michigan as they do of the coal beds of Pennsylvania or Ohio and laugh at the predictions of us alarmists. Yet, these predictions are not made in haste, but are based on exact calculations. There's no reason to think, however, that the consumption will die off, while the facilities for the lumber are so great and so many markets are calling for supply. The waste will go on. The owners of the land will use their opportunity and let the future take care of itself. They would not be American if they should so voluntarily curtail a profitable business in view of spreading it over a longer succession of years. Sound familiar? It's more probable that new mills will be built than those already built and will reduce their production and their capacity. The warning's not new. It was uttered years ago, and it's been repeated with succeeding seasons, thus far with no effect. What's interesting is that in 1869, he wrote this in 1868, 1869, Michigan became the leading source of lumber in the entire nation, entire world. Okay? By the mid-1890s, a mere 25 years later, most of Michigan's old-growth pine and oak forest had been stripped clean, and by 1930, the lumber era was over, as seen by this chart. And you can point to the fur trade, the fisheries, all of these. I don't have time to go through them, but they all did the same thing, boom and bust, boom and bust. Okay? Ecosystems do that from time to time, but what we need is more sustainable conservation. Okay? Another thing that's shared by all the bays, and I spoke about this earlier, is that because it's this nexus of commerce and development, it has a diverse and complex set of conservation issues. Loss of habitat. Here's all the loss of wetland habitat in Saginaw Bay, all the red areas. Those were once coastal wetland habitat. Those are what we've lost. Invasive species like Phragmites. Altered hydrology, which is causing these massive, up in the watershed, which causes excess nutrients and sediments to enter the system. Migration barriers. Contaminants. Remember those 5 smelters I talked about at the outlet of the Fox River? Well, this is the outlet of the Fox River in Green Bay. It's one of the largest areas of concern in the Great Lakes as a result of heavy metals contamination due to those ore factories that existed back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And then climate change draped on all of those. And so what does that mean? It's not just complex, these are highly stressed environments. This is a recent map that just came out. I don't know how many of you saw it. Got a lot of press in USA Today. This was a study that came out in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences. It was actually led by Dr. Dave Allen at the University of Michigan, one of our former trustees. But on the science panel that helped do this study, it included one of our current trustees, Dr. Al Steinman, and myself, Dr. Patrick Dorn, who I mentioned earlier, and then Lindsay Chatterton, who's going to actually give a talk here in March. So what you see here is the major bays I'm talking about. Red is more cumulative stress. This looked at over 35 different stressors in the Great Lakes. Saginaw Bay, Western Lake Erie, all highly stressed. But look at all the smaller bays. Darker, the orange to red is really stressed. Every single one of them, highly stressed environments. Okay? So what do we do about this? Well, the real problem here is that key ecosystem processes of the bays have been altered such that they can no longer sustain native biodiversity or valued ecosystem services in many instances. This is a picture actually of people enjoying the beach on Western Lake Erie shores. You can't do that right now. There was a window where we've been able to do that, but because of harmful algal blooms and muck on the beaches as a result, you can't do that right now. But also, some of the best birding areas in all the world occur here. So what we have to do, I mentioned this earlier, if we're going to bring back the spectacular treasures that they are, what we have to do is dampen these booms and busts. We can't have these massive things that we experienced in the late 1800s through the mid 1900s. We have to have equitable balance between competing interests. Okay? How do we equitably use land and water resources to benefit nature and people? And that's really the essence of what we do at the Nature Conservancy in our Great Lakes Project. Our goal here is to ensure that the Great Lakes watershed is among the most effectively managed ecosystems on Earth. Okay? That's our North Star, but that's a loaded term. There's a lot of complexity behind that. But I can honestly say that in the last 4 years since I've got here, where we have come is just, it boggles my mind. It truly does, in terms of how strategically, how systematically, and comprehensively we're trying to address these problems. And we've broken it down into 6 major strategies focused on our inland watersheds, like Green Bay, and how they, Green Bay watershed, Saginaw Bay watershed, and how they affect the Great Lakes, like our northern forests, coastal systems, our native fisheries. How do we make sure that the food web for our native fisheries is intact and thriving? Aquatic invasive species, and then draped over all of these, climate change. How do we address it? Okay? Well, one thing I hope you caught through this is that there's a consistent theme. That these bays, and we're focused, our primary focus right now is Green Bay, Saginaw Bay, and Western Lake Erie, and these are the watersheds or drainages for them. They are very similar in many respects, both ecologically and socioeconomically. And so what we often do at TNC when we are faced with these circumstances, because we like to think outside the box and we like to tackle really big problems, but it's not cost effective to try to do that in every place and replicate it if you can actually have a proving grounds in one place. Okay, so what we did back in late 2009, early 2010, is we did a peer review and integrative planning. So we did independent planning for the 3 of these, but then the teams came together and said, well, what's the same? And what are the opportunities in any given place where it's a better proving ground for this strategy in Saginaw Bay, but then if it's proved successful, we can export it to other places. And that's what led to these various strategies I'm going to talk about right now. So our first, I'm going to go over our focal issues and strategies. The first thing that came out for each of these 3 bays, the first thing that came out was in Green Bay. I'm telling you, the focal issue here is that the Packers are too darn good. Okay? They continually win the NFC North Division. So the only chance my Lions have to get to the playoffs is through a wild card. We have not won at Lambeau Field over in Green Bay in 22 years, okay? And I'm getting sick and tired of this. So what we got to do is destroy the Packers. No, I digress. I'm sorry. When I hear Green Bay, as a lifelong Lions fan, I tend to get off target. So anyway, where was I? But in all seriousness, I'm going to have a sign-up sheet. So for anyone who really wants to help me help the Lions destroy the Packers, please sign up. No, in all seriousness, back to the talk. We do have some Green Bay focal issues and strategies. One is stream connectivity, which I mentioned earlier. We have over 30 migratory fish species dependent on the streams that drain to these bays, like northern pike, perch, a lot of our native suckers, northern hog suckers, et cetera, white suckers. But what's interesting is it's not just dams. The biggest problem is we have a lot of these road stream culverts on the smaller tributaries that empty in that are improperly placed and create little waterfalls that fish can't get up to their spawning grounds. We're working with Pete McIntyre out of University of Wisconsin-Madison to do a comprehensive inventory of barriers in the Great Lakes. The current data suggests that there's 60,000 barriers. That's a big problem, but we're going to solve it. And we are solving it. We're also working on wetland restoration to benefit pike through mitigation banking. Anyone know what mitigation banking is? It's where you set aside lands that are suited to wetland restoration and people who actually have a need to develop a wetland for a valid purpose. There are valid purposes to that in terms of meeting our other social economic needs. Then they will pay for the restoration. So it's a tit for tat. We have to, under our migratory waterfowl treaty with Canada and the United States, we have to have a no net loss of wetlands. And so we're helping ensure that in Green Bay. Some of the main strategies we're using is we're actually developing prioritization tools, a variety of them, so that we can strategically and efficiently and in the most cost-efficient manner restore stream connectivity and restore these wetlands. We're also training, and when it comes to these barriers, we're training all kinds of road commissioners across Green Bay and elsewhere in the UP in order to properly design and place these structures in the future. Saginaw Bay, focal issues and strategies. I could give actually tomorrow I've got to give a 1-hour talk on this slide alone. So it's a very complex issue, but nonetheless, it's focused on developing meaningful outcomes in terms of stream habitat and fish communities for agricultural, the working lands, not just in Saginaw Bay. This is something we want to expand across all of North America, so it goes even beyond the Great Lakes. But a fundamental question to all of conservation is how much is enough? So if these watersheds in Saginaw Bay, like the Rifle, Shiawassee, the Cass, and the Pigeon and Pinnebog, are impacted, heavily impacted by agriculture, so that the habitat and fish communities are impacted. How much of these BMPs that we put in the watershed is it going to take to make sure that these factors are no longer limiting? We're actually calculating it, and the numbers are staggering. These are actual data. And what we're finding is in the Shiawassee, it's upwards of $18 million alone, initial investment. And that's not the continuing investment. Combined across all of them, it's about $49 million initial investment. The whole conservation title of the Farm Bill coming to Michigan that's in the Senate right now, waiting to be appropriated, $50 million. We can't afford to just spend that in 4 watersheds when the problem is that much bigger. So, but we're addressing that. Western Lake Erie, focal issues and strategies. This is where we are addressing more issues than any other place because it is the most complex and most diverse area in the Great Lakes. Wetland connectivity, invasive species like Phragmites, and harmful algal blooms that you can see from space. All that green, harmful algal bloom. Back in 2011, the worst on record. Okay, how are we doing this? Well, here's North Maumee Bay, which includes our preserved Erie Marsh. All these yellow areas are fish passage control structures that we're going to be putting in starting this year. Here's an example of a fish passage control between 2 different wetlands. We're also doing water level management that will actually help knock back in an efficient manner invasive species like Phragmites. We're also, this just is a biggie. A big problem with these harmful algal blooms is the misapplication and over-application of fertilizers, either manure or man-made fertilizers. And what's interesting is just a week ago, a letter came out and from ag industry and ag, like the Farm Bureau, Ohio Farm Bureau, National Farm Bureau, to all the farmers in Ohio. This went out to every single farmer in Ohio and said, you better apply the 4R strategy to your land, which is applying the right source of fertilizer at the right time, at the right place, and the right amount. That's the 4R strategy. Otherwise, you will risk regulation. Please do it. So this is an internal plea. Never had this before in the ag community. That's huge, and we played a huge role in that. Western Lake Erie, the other thing is I said, you know, we have to inform our conservation strategies by science, but it have to be grounded in reality, and we're doing that in Western Lake Erie. What we're doing is using social science, a whole new, to really actually proactively address it, to understand the social cultural values of places like Luna Pier, which is just north of this North Maumee Bay area I showed you, okay? Only through getting that type of input on what are their values and needs can we truly devise strategies that address the triple bottom line, that sustainability, that benefit, it's a win-win-win, ecologically, socioculturally, and economically. Okay? So I hope you see from my talk, that coming to closing, that indeed the bays are engines and treasures of the Great Lakes. They do indeed have a boom and bust history, ecologically as well as socioeconomically. We must dampen those cycles through sustainable conservation actions, and that's what we're doing at the Nature Conservancy. They present a very big challenge to us, though, because of their diverse socioeconomic setting and complex problems that presents to us. And they are where all of our elements of our Great Lakes Project come together. But more importantly, they are treasures in terms of their beauty, and you have to witness them firsthand. And so I'm going to take just a few moments to show you some places where I hope in your travels in the coming years you'll be able to go and witness the grand splendor of these bays: Green Bay, Saginaw Bay, and Maumee Bay. Green Bay, Sensabaugh State Wildlife Area. Best time to go there is either in the spring or the fall. Expansive coastal marshes. This is nearly 4,000 acres of coastal marsh habitat. Just beautiful. Potawatomi State Park way up here, where you can get the bird's eye view of Sturgeon Bay. Gorgeous. This is a karst area because you're up on the Door Peninsula, so you're on the Niagara Escarpment. So you see these karst islands out here, and you might actually see some colonial nesting birds during the late spring. Saginaw Bay, Wildfowl Bay State Wildlife Area, owned by Michigan DNR. Best time, again, go is spring and fall. You'll see some of the greatest diversity and greatest abundance of migratory shorebirds and waterfowl passing through. And then Western Lake Erie, Maumee Bay, Erie Marsh Preserve, which we own. Best time to go is spring and fall. And I might even convince Chris May to let you come out and see some of the actual conservation action on the ground with our coastal wetland restoration or fish passage control. This is McGee Marsh, Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge. Best time to go is March, early May. They call it the biggest birding week in America. This year it occurs May 3rd to the 12th, and what you'll see is a spectacular warbler migration. Over 200 species of warbler come through, and you can sit on park benches and actually see 20 of these species from your bench. So, but you better book your hotel about 2 years in advance because it's very busy. So with that, I'm ready for questions, but as I want to reiterate what was mentioned earlier, we still have 3 talks, fabulous talks, I hear, coming up in the next successive months by Dave Ewert, Lindsay Chatterton, and our own state director, Helen Taylor. And finally, I want to leave you with the fact that a little story about me. I'm one of the fortunate few that knew since the age of 12 what my dream job would be. I grew up in Muskegon. My dream job was to do something to help conserve and restore the Great Lakes. I am truly blessed to be living my dream today. I've been with the Conservancy for 4 years, and I'm getting verklempt. I am proud truly proud to work for this organization, and the people I work with are dedicated, hardworking individuals. And I work for an organization that takes on complex problems. Not afraid to do that. Not afraid to think outside the box. Okay? Not afraid to work with unconventional partners, because we have to. We're all in this together. If we truly believe in sustainability, we have to do it. Okay? If we're going to restore and protect these great treasures of the Great Lakes, like the bays that I talked about tonight, okay? We have to do that. All right? But it only happens through the generous donations of people like you. So, if for nothing else, if you want to learn more about the work we do, I encourage you to go to these websites. Okay? You'll find out about a much deeper and breadth of content of what we do, where we work in the Great Lakes and beyond. But if you want to join us in our effort to conserve these great treasures, please do. And Thanks again for your time. That's great. Questions?
What's the impact of the changing water levels of the lakes? And
loaded question.
How much did you foresee it? And what's going to happen?
Now, that's a loaded question. How much did we foresee it? Not really. Predicting water level change, there are cycles that we go through, and we are in a natural low, but it's unprecedented. It's a perfect question with regards to these cycles. What we've gone is we were on the downswing where we expected lower lake levels, and we went past what we expected. It's like, when's it going to come back up? When's it going to come back up? But in reality, what we don't have, what we're operating with is unprecedented climate. So we have no ability to truly forecast the projections, and what's now is confusing is that we have competing models out there. Are they going to come back up as climate continues to warm, or are they going to go down? There's lots of variables that play into water levels. If you have ice on the lakes, it minimizes evapotranspiration. The more clouds you have, minimizes evapotranspiration, okay? If you have more intense rainfall or more rainfall events. So there's all of these factors that we have to come into play, and when it's hard to have a crystal ball. So what we are doing is actually trying to adapt to both or all scenarios. Thinking about strategies, if they do continue to go down, what opportunities or challenges does that present? If they were to come back up or go up even further in terms of historic highs, what challenges might that present? In terms of land protection, it's very complex in terms of land protection because of the laws we have in this state and throughout much of the Great Lakes in terms of who owns the shoreline. But it's one of the more complex and large-scale problems. But the other thing that we're doing, and not necessarily that we're doing, is we're keeping a watchful eye over, is that there's all kinds of ideas and ways we have levers to manage water levels, okay, at the St. Lawrence. And then there's also talk about putting baffles in, okay, the St. Clair River, potentially. And that's by people who live in Georgian Bay who are, anytime you live in a shallow area, like the bays, they experience some of the worst when it comes to water level drops. Because what happens is a foot drop might mean 100 yards of loss of surface water, okay? But whether or not those are, if there's any efficacy in those engineering techniques remain to be seen. So there's ideas floating around, but anyway, yeah.
I noticed on your map, and probably something that most of us know, that Lake Superior looks like it's one of the least stressed of all the lakes.
Yes.
Probably because of the fact that it's the coldest, deepest, and less developed, right?
Correct. Correct.
So why are the bays still so stressed in Lake Superior, given that the lake is still...
For all the reasons I cited there, almost all of them have communities around them, okay? They all have low circulation. Many of them have, from even little developments, have contaminants issues. So septic systems, and a lot of, in Lake Superior, you have granitic areas, okay? The only solution to small development is septic systems. Septic systems don't work well in granitic areas, but when it's your only option because you don't have the infrastructure. So that's the reason. It truly, even the smallest of bays and harbors are epicenters of human development, so.
Does size enter into the definition of a bay, or is it just the surrounding area that defines the bay?
It's got to be bigger than a cove. I don't know what the size of a definition and measurement units of a cove is, though, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
You briefly mentioned invasive species. What are your thoughts about the Asian carp?
My thought is come back in 2 months and ask Lindsay Chatterton, our Director of Aquatic Invasive Species, that question. I really shouldn't talk on that because that is Lindsay. I'd be stepping on Lindsay's toes. So, question?
I'm not speaking from fact, I'm only speaking from rumors. But aren't we pumping out a lot of water just to bottle it so we can throw our plastic bottles around? How much water comes out of our lakes for bottled water?
Not as much as it used to. The Great Lakes Compact was designed for that very purpose, okay, which was signed by all 8 states and 2 Canadian provinces back in 2008. And Michigan was the first, so all states have to develop regulations and information decision tools that guide the protection of ground and surface waters from that exact, for that exact purpose, okay? So as it stands now, we are protected from major export of Great Lakes freshwaters outside the basin.
You mentioned that the water level dropped below the point that you expected it to and continue to drop. Is anyone doing technical analysis of charts at the Nature Conservancy?
No. Technical analysis of charts, navigation charts, or?
In the financial world, there are charts where you can look at a chart and you can tell which direction it's going to go. And the skills that Elliott wave theory and all the different Fibonacci retracements, that sort of thing, all those can be applied to any chart regardless of what the underlying measurement is. It can be applied to this as well. And so based on, and that can be used as a predictive measure to tell whether or not it's going to continue going down or if it's going to bottom out or actually recover at some point.
Right, and that's out of my area of expertise, but the people who I know who are working in that realm, and that's what I mentioned, is that the extrapolation of the trend are going in different directions. And that's the level, it's the paucity of data that we have from the historic records and the complexity draped over that in terms of the numerous dimensions that come, variables that come into play, and the unknowns draped on top of that. I wish, my mantra, you can ask my staff, my mantra is our role of science to inform sustainable decisions related to sustainable use of resources. Our #1 goal must always be to develop models that allow us to forecast and predict the future as accurately as we can. We have to. Unfortunately, in most instances, we're dealing with a paucity of data in terms of the number of data points and in many instances, the time frame over which we have data. But that's our mantra. I could talk about that whole section on Saginaw Bay with the how much is enough. That's exactly what we're trying to do, is forecast into the future how much and how would all of these different points that we have interest in terms of financial inputs, in terms of conservation actions, in terms of conservation outputs, but ultimately in terms of outcomes we care about, what would their trajectory look like? Because that's what drives the change, gets people to think outside the box. No one has ever seen an estimate of $49 million for 4 small watersheds to solve a problem. We just keep throwing the mentality in a lot of conservation is more is better. To a point, more is better. But we have to be practical that we have very limited resources. So I know I'm getting a little outside your question, but there's smarter people than I that are working on it, and they're coming up with conflicting answers. So.
How active is the U.S. Lake Survey Group, and do you interact with them at all?
No. The U.S. Lake Survey Group, which lakes? There's many lake survey groups. Are you referring to SOLEC or USGS?
I'm not sure. My father-in-law was head of that unit. They have an office, or had an and they did all the charting, and they were involved with the Canadians in level of water flow over Niagara Falls.
Ah, okay. That would have been in relation to the Corps of Engineers?
Yes.
Yes.
Are they active at all?
Well, they have, I had this discussion earlier with someone else before the talk. The primary control, the Corps has powerful control over all the waters of the United States. Okay, they have, with EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they have shared authority over all of the Clean Water Act. Okay, so 404 and 401 permitting, which probably don't mean anything to you, but all of the dredging and filling of our waterways. They also have all of the authority of our waterways from a national security standpoint. So the hard engineering, which is where all the navigation, and they also have full authority over the commerce of our waterways. So ensuring that we have free and efficient commerce, or free and efficient transport of for the purpose of commerce and national security is their mantra. Okay? But they have huge authority over the Clean Water Act.
Do you interact with them at all?
I don't personally. I did in my previous job. We at the Nature Conservancy work with the Corps of Engineers extensively in our Great Rivers program. So, but that's mainly when it comes to all of the large water work, infrastructure projects and dam operations to ensure, we call it environmental flows or ecological flows are being met.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One question. The map that another map that you showed in your slides, one was Maumee Bay, one Green Bay. I can't remember which one had the high concentration of metals that you were talking about.
That's Green Bay.
Green Bay. Is there anything actively being done? Is that a Superfund site? Or?
It is. An area of concern is really the same as Superfund site. Area of concern is the more benign term that's used today instead of Superfund. So it is active. And you know, one of the nice things is, you know, we hear about, well, there's more Superfund or area of concern sites in the Great Lakes than any other region of the nation. There's 46 of them, but we've made greater headway. We, as a Nature Conservancy, don't really put a lot of our eggs in that basket because so much emphasis and money is going into it, and they are addressing it real strategically. And the reason being is that as a problem, it's large in scope in terms of the footprint, and it's complex, but you know where they are, and we know what we have to do. The problem is dealing with the spoils. But we have the technologies and whatnot of dredging and getting rid of the materials, but it's very, very, very costly.
So the Nature Conservancy, or it doesn't in any way get involved with the restoration of it after it's been cleaned up, or with an area like that, are you guiding any restoration as they are cleaning up, or no?
I can't answer. I'm not aware of that. I might ask my colleagues if we've done any of that we're aware of.
We're doing restoration in proximity to the areas of concern, so
Yeah.
coastal wetlands restoration. But usually these things are complementary and adjacent. But
Yeah.
We're not in the part of those restorations. Those are usually handled by a lot of engineering contracts and remediation firms.
I saw another. Yeah.
Two basic questions. You talk about the phosphorus load in western Lake Erie.
Mm-hmm.
And 30 years ago, when we tried to attack that, most of the phosphorus was attached to sediments. And so things like no-till farming and filter strips, which are putting a lot of effort in,
Right.
were the answer to that. Most recent data shows that most of the phosphorus showing up in western Lake Erie is soluble,
Yep.
and particularly coming out of that, which those are less effective. So my question really is, do you personally believe that there's a chance of controlling the phosphorus in western Lake Erie without regulating farming beyond this voluntary baloney that's going on today?
Well,
Should I tell you which side I'm on there?
as a scientist, I firmly believe that the questions were, and my talk is on this very topic tomorrow. Maybe I should have you join the conference call. But as a scientist, what we need to know is first, or society, is do these BMPs, we have nearly 200 different best management practices to keep sediment and nutrients in place. None of them are 100% effective unless you build a big reservoir and trap the sediments. Even that's not 100% effective. But what we haven't done is the rigorous analysis to say, okay, well, in the past it was sediments, but it was also 35 years ago, Lake Erie was dead, as you mentioned. But what we did was two things. We did the no-till farming. It was particulate phosphorus, total phosphorus bound, which phosphorus binds to sediments generally. Most forms of phosphorus binds to sediments. So as sediment moves, phosphorus moves. Phosphorus is the most limiting nutrient in fresh waters. When you go to salt water, it's nitrogen, so the two primary nutrients. So in the Great Lakes, we want to keep phosphorus on the land and out of our waters. And 35 years ago, we did that through two major pathways. No-till farming, which is still very effective in terms of other dimensions, sediment, so we don't want to move away from that, but also through wastewater treatment facilities. Huge, so you all remember no phosphate detergents, right? You can't get them. You can't get phosphorus fertilizers unless you get starter fertilizer, unless you're an ag producer. So industrial producers can get phosphate fertilizers. But to answer your question, I think we can get there if we continue to get the ag industry to say internally, I mean, I can give you that letter and I'll forward it to you, and you see that, but I mean, to me, I've never seen that before in my 25 years. And I worked mainly in ag when I was in Missouri for 18 years, worked in that face of conservation. I've never seen that many groups come together and say, at the risk of regulation, you better get your act together. So I'm just curious as to say, how big of a kick in the butt is that going to be? I don't know. But 4Rs is part of the solution. It's not going to be the whole solution, because we know now there's scientific evidence that the dissolved reactive phosphorus is coming through the drain tiles. So the other thing that we are doing at the Nature Conservancy is looking at innovative ways to actually manage drain tiles by putting in computer systems that turn them on or open and close them. Drain tiles are where farmers go in and put tiles down about 3 foot. Okay, these are pipes that run under the land so that they can quickly, it allows them to more effectively manage soil moisture. That's a key element for them to maximize production, maximize profits. Problem is if it becomes a conduit for phosphorus, dissolved reactive phosphorus, which is the most available nutrient to those algae that live in western Lake Erie, we have to do something about it. And so can we engineer our way out of it? Can we use existing practices? I don't know. I think we can get there. That's a big step if we can get most of the people in the basin, western Lake Erie Basin, Maumee watershed, to apply the 4R strategy. That'd be a huge coup. But, I mean, that letter only came out 2 weeks ago, so we'll see. And it mentioned regulation, so that's the first big kick before the actual regulation takes effect, so.
If we're bringing phosphorus in by rail car as fertilizer, and it can only leave through our lakes, how long before the sponges fall?
If it can only leave through our lakes, the sponge is already full on the land. That's what we're seeing. Right?
Yeah. That was my point.
Yeah.
Okay.
But so I don't know how often you go out in the field. I go out and talk to farmers and they don't get it. Okay? You can tell them you don't need to put any more fertilizer on your field. That's the socio-cultural dimension of conservation. Okay? You talk with the younger generations of the farmers. We went out a couple months ago, younger, and they sat there. Daughter, mother. These were farmers up in Saginaw Bay. Daughter sat there and said, "Mom, you don't get it." She had books. She's in the MEAP program. I don't know if you guys are familiar with MEAP, the Michigan Agricultural Environmental Assurance Program. We're the only one in the nation, voluntary assurance program, to do best management practices to minimize environmental impacts. Her daughter's doing that, and the mom's going, "Eh. And unless it affects my bottom line, I don't care." But you know what? A lot of the practice she started to find out improved their bottom line. And the main one was fertilizer application. They didn't see reduced yields when they quit putting on the fertilizer, And so, boom. But getting them to do that once, that's a key. Prior to that, she's like, no, you know, history tells me I got to put it on there, and they're not scientists, so I don't know. You know, that's a social dimension of conservation that's hard not to crack. And that's like in Western Lake Erie, we're finally actually proactively entering into that dimension. And Nature Conservancy, we're hiring sociologists, economists to address that very issue. Is that John? Hey.
To follow up on my friend's question, would industry have made the kinds of progress it has made in emissions and discharge reductions if industry had been allowed to do them as voluntary programs?
I don't know.
I think we have a shot at the question.
Yeah. Oh, I'm being told, wrap up, wrap up, wrap up. What time? Oh, we are way over, sorry. One more question.
What about the large-scale animal farming being rate business as it relates to?
So confined animal feeding operations? Yeah. It's actually surprising. I spent 18 years in Missouri prior to coming here, and a much bigger issue down there, so it was much more on our radar. It's actually, in a comparative sense, confined animal feeding operations, large-scale hog, chicken, turkey production is quite minimal in the Great Lakes. It's huge in southern Green Bay, and we have the data to show it. It's huge. Actually, there's some isolated pockets in the Rifle River in terms of dairy production. But in terms of the footprint in the Great Lakes, it's actually quite small, surprisingly. Go, gotta go. No, everyone's wrap up.
Thank you, Scott. We appreciate it.
Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate it and look forward to seeing you next month. In the interim, just to make you aware, the Institute of Science is now open both Friday and Saturday evening until 10 p.m. It's a great opportunity to see our new observatory and telescope. Admission is reduced after 5 p.m. And the first Friday of every month, courtesy of Masco Corporation, it's free admission after 5 p.m. So let everyone know. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. We're sticking around a little bit, so if you want to have questions, I'll be outside. Oh, well, thank you so much. Oh, well, thank you so much, Fred. I appreciate it.
See you. Good night.
In terms of TNC or in terms of just general conservation community?
General conservation.
Pretty good. I mean, it depends on the issue. So right now, we're on the precipice of unveiling the reauthorization of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. So it'd be the second revision. It was originally drafted back in '78 and then reauthorized or revised in '87. And this is supposed to be a big one. We had a lot of input on that. It's supposedly, I've seen early drafts, it contains not just water quality, it also sets out to establish goals for habitat and also biodiversity. That's a biggie. So it's a joint commission level. So we cooperate. EPA cooperates with Environment Canada on the monitoring of lakes through SOLEC, the State of the Lakes Monitoring Program. And then also the International Joint Commission on our side is the State Department level partner with the State Department, I don't even know, on the Canadian side.
So it's mainly with the Canadian government as
Yes.
opposed to individual provinces?
Yeah, most of it, yeah. In Canada, it's at a Canadian government level. So we do a lot of work, though, with the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources. They own the lion's share of the real estate. Not own, I should say, have jurisdiction over the lion's share of the real estate in the Great Lakes Basin. So, yeah. But
Thank you very much. This is an enlightening lecture.
oh, well, I appreciate it. Thank you.